My father-in-law stood in the doorway of my apartment, smirking as he shoved the divorce demand onto the table. "You can't afford a lawyer to fight my son," he laughed, his voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. "You'll leave this marriage with nothing, just like you came into it." I looked down at the demand. A calculated trap designed to take my savings, my home, and my dignity. I looked him dead in the eye and simply replied, "You're right." He thought he'd won. He thought I was just a helpless, broke woman with no family to back her up. But what he didn't know was that I had been keeping a massive secret for 8 years. At the final hearing, his smug smile vanished completely when the courtroom doors swung open and my brother walked in. Make sure to drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can say hello, and follow this story until the very end to see how true justice unfolds. My name is Sophia Bennett, and at 34 years old, I thought I knew what sacrifice meant. For 8 long years, I lived in the shadow of the Vance family, married to Richard, a man whose spineless ambition was matched only by the suffocating influence of his father, Arthur Vance. Arthur was a self-made real estate mogul who treated people like leverage and loyalty like a commodity. From the moment Richard brought me home, Arthur viewed me as an unworthy intrusion, a penniless nobody who didn't belong in their social hierarchy. What Arthur never understood was that when Richard was struggling to get his property management firm off the ground, it wasn't his father's money that saved him. It was my sweat equity. For half a decade, I worked 16-hour days behind the scenes. I managed client contracts, balanced the books, and organized every single operational detail that turned Richard's failing venture into a multi-million-dollar success. But because I loved my husband, I let Richard take all the credit. My name wasn't listed on the company registration or the deed of our marital home. I let Arthur believe I was just a quiet, unassuming housewife who brought nothing to the table. I purposefully kept my family background completely private, choosing to build a life on my own terms without hiding behind my family's name. That intentional silence, however, was about to become Arthur and Richard's biggest mistake. The betrayal didn't come with a screaming match or a tearful confession. It came on a cold Tuesday afternoon when Richard simply stopped coming home, leaving his father to do his dirty work. Arthur had finally found what he considered a suitable replacement for me, the daughter of a wealthy commercial investor whose family could elevate Richard's business to the next level. All they needed was to discard me cleanly and cheaply. When Arthur walked into my living room, he didn't even bother taking off his coat. He stood near the entryway, smirking as he slapped a harsh legal demand down onto the coffee table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Richard is moving on, Sophia," Arthur said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've outlived your usefulness. The house, the business, the accounts. They're all under Richard's name. If you sign this agreement today, we'll give you $20,000 as a courtesy settlement. If you don't, we'll drag this through court until you don't have a single penny left to your name." I listened as he laid out the brutal terms. It was a total wipeout of my rights, leaving me with a meager lump sum and 30 days to pack my bags. When I looked up, Arthur was grinning, confident that he had backed a defenseless woman into a corner. "You can't afford a lawyer to fight my son, Sophia. You're outmatched, outfunded, and completely alone." I looked him dead in the eye, set the demand down, and quietly replied, "You're right." He mistook my calm for surrender. He had no idea I was just letting him walk straight into the trap. The moment Arthur's car pulled out of my driveway, the artificial composure I'd maintained vanished. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from a cold, sharp rage that had been building for 8 years. I walked into the kitchen, picked up my phone, and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. When the line picked up, a firm, authoritative voice answered. "Marcus Bennett." "Marcus," I said softly. "It's Sophia. I need my brother." There was a sudden, heavy pause on the other end, followed by the sound of a chair rolling back. "Sophia? What's wrong? Are you okay? For years, I had insisted on living an independent life, refusing to leverage my family's influence. My brother, Marcus, wasn't just a lawyer, he was a senior JAG military prosecutor and one of the most formidable corporate litigators in the country, specializing in unraveling high-level financial fraud and hidden corporate assets. While Arthur Vance thought he was dealing with an isolated, penniless orphan, he had actually declared war on a woman whose brother dismantled corrupt operations for a living. "They took everything, Marcus," I told him, pacing across the hardwood floor. "Arthur and Richard forged my signature on tax returns while I was caring for Richard's sick mother last year. They transferred my shares, stripped my name off the joint deeds, and just demanded I give up all rights to the business I built." Marcus's tone shifted instantly from concerned sibling to lethal prosecutor. "They forged federal tax records and illegally transferred marital assets? Sophia, tell me you didn't sign anything." "I didn't," I replied. Arthur laughed in my face and told me I couldn't afford a lawyer to fight his son. Over the line, I heard Marcus let out a low, dangerous laugh. "He really said that? Good. Let him think he's won. Pack your essentials and get out of that house tonight. By tomorrow morning, my team and I will have every financial audit, bank statement, and tax record Arthur Vance has touched in the last decade. They wanted a legal battle, Sophia. I'm going to give them a war." Over the next 3 weeks, I moved into a quiet apartment, intentionally playing the role of a defeated, broken woman. I ignored Richard's brief, insincere text messages, checking if I had agreed to the terms yet. I let them believe I was wallowing in despair, giving them a false sense of security while Marcus and his elite forensic accounting team went to work in absolute secrecy. What Marcus uncovered was far worse than simple corporate greed. It was a massive, systematically organized trail of financial fraud. Using federal audit protocols, Marcus's team discovered that Arthur hadn't just altered the business deeds, he had illegally funneled over $2 million of the company's revenue into offshore shell accounts to keep it out of the marital estate. Even worse, the signature on the secondary tax exemption forms from the previous year, the one stripping me of my corporate equity, was an undeniable, poorly executed forgery. Arthur had grown so arrogant over the years that he assumed no one would ever audit his books, let alone a high-ranking military prosecutor with access to federal investigators. Meanwhile, Arthur and Richard were celebrating early. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that they were hosting a lavish dinner party at an upscale downtown restaurant. Arthur was proudly telling everyone in their business circle how his son had cleanly cut ties with his deadweight wife without paying a single dime in alimony or asset division. Richard was already parading around his new socialite fiancée, completely convinced that our upcoming court date was nothing more than a formal rubber stamp to finalize my total surrender. They thought they had trapped a helpless victim. They had no idea that every lie, every forged signature, and every hidden bank account had already been carefully indexed into a legal trap designed to destroy them both. The day of the final hearing arrived, cold and clear. The county courthouse sat in the center of town, an intimidating monument of granite and polished marble. As I walked into courtroom 302, Arthur and Richard were already seated at the defense table, looking like men who had already won the war. They were flanked by their high-priced corporate defense attorney, a man known for grinding opponents into dust. Arthur wore a tailored Italian suit and a smirk that screamed absolute superiority. Richard barely looked at me, pretending to review his phone while his father leaned over to whisper a taunt across the room. "Last chance to take the 20,000, Sophia." Arthur sneered, keeping his voice low enough for the bailiff to miss. "Agree now, or walk out of here with nothing." I didn't answer. I sat down at the plaintiff's table completely alone, setting my hands flat on the polished oak. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff announced the judge. Right as the judge called our case, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a decisive thud. The sound echoed through the high-ceilinged room. Every head turned. Walking down the center aisle was Marcus, wearing his dark, immaculate military dress uniform, adorned with medals that commanded instant respect. Flanking him were three sharp-suited litigators, followed by two federal financial investigators holding digital evidence drives. The air in the courtroom shifted instantly. Arthur's attorney turned to look at the entrance, and the moment he recognized Marcus Bennett, his face went completely pale. His pen slipped from his hand, clattering onto the table. Marcus stepped past the bar, bowed slightly to the judge, and presented his entry of appearance. Marcus Bennett, Your Honor, representing the plaintiff, Sophia Vance. Arthur's smirk vanished into thin air. He looked frantically between Marcus's uniform, his son, and his terrified attorney. Realization slowly dawning that the woman he tried to crush was never alone at all. The room was dead silent as Marcus stepped up to the podium, connecting a secure, encrypted drive to the courtroom monitor. Your Honor, Marcus began, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Before we discuss any marital asset division, we are submitting a motion for an emergency freeze on all corporate and personal assets belonging to Richard Vance and Arthur Vance. Arthur's attorney stumbled to his feet, trying to regain control. Objection, Your Honor. This is a simple dissolution of marriage. The plaintiff is attempting to turn this into a fishing expedition. It's not a fishing expedition, Marcus replied coldly, turning to look directly at Arthur. It is a criminal investigation. We have submitted sworn affidavits from forensic auditors proving that my client's signature was forged on state tax filings and corporate asset transfers while she was acting as a primary caregiver. Furthermore, we have digital proof of over $2 million in offshore transfers designed to defraud both the court and my client. Arthur's face turned an unhealthy shade of red. He slammed his hand on the desk, shouting, "This is absurd! She was just a house—" "Mr. Vance, quiet down or I will hold you in contempt." The judge slammed her gavel, her eyes sharp as she reviewed the screen display Marcus's team had brought up. Arthur's own attorney frantically grabbed his arm, pulling him back into his chair and whispering fiercely into his ear, warning him to shut his mouth before he spoke himself directly into federal custody. The judge spent 15 long minutes reviewing the evidence on her screen, her expression growing colder with every minute. When she finally looked up, her ruling was swift and uncompromising. In light of the overwhelming evidence of fraud, forgery, and deliberate concealment of marital assets, this court orders an immediate freeze on all business and personal accounts associated with the defendants. Furthermore, I am awarding the plaintiff 60% of the audited company value, full ownership of the marital home, and referring these forged tax filings directly to the state prosecutor's office. The state prosecutor didn't waste any time following up on the judge's referral. Within 3 months, Arthur Vance was facing multiple counts of corporate fraud, tax evasion, and forgery. To avoid federal prison time, he was forced to liquidate a major portion of his real estate holdings, effectively dismantling the empire he had spent a lifetime building on the backs of others. Richard's business, stripped of its stolen capital and disgraced by public scandal, declared bankruptcy. His wealthy socialite fiancée broke off their engagement the moment the court-frozen accounts made the headlines. Last I heard, Richard was living in a small rented apartment, working as a mid-level manager for a company he used to compete with, completely humbled by the consequences of his own greed. As for me, I sold the marital home and used my 60% share of the business valuation to launch my own independent property management firm. With Marcus by my side as an advisor, my company grew faster in its first year than Richard's ever did. People like Arthur and Richard think that quiet people are weak and that playing dirty guarantees a win. But they forget one simple truth. Moving in silence isn't a sign of surrender. It's just how you prepare for victory. Never let anyone underestimate your worth, and never be afraid to let justice take its course.